Peter Boyles, of course, the former morning show host here on 710 KNUS. And stand by for a great announcement will be coming your way pretty soon. We have done this series called The Shoot, Stealing from Professional Wrestling. There's works and shoots are real. And it's been with great success thanks to Mark Crowley and Brian Taylor and Kelly Michaels. We have put this series together and it's been wonderful. Now, recently, the attack happens to Salman Rushdie. I was amazed, and then again I say I should not have been amazed, the lack of people with interest in this in mainstream media and of course in talk radio. I immediately contacted our Mark Crowley, who puts all of these things together for us. I said, Mark, please get a hold of Robert Spencer. We got to do a shoot episode on Salman Rushdie. So without further ado, I respect no man more. He's a very brave guy. He's put himself in the line of fire as well. Robert Spencer from Jihad Watch joins us from his home. Mr. Spencer, good morning, and thanks for doing this with us one more time.
Good to see you again, Peter. Thank you.
You know, you too. I mean, my respect for you goes back. It's been probably 25 years we've done radio and television together, and you've, as we say, and as they say in pro wrestling, you've taken the heat, and you've built the heat, and you've never backed down, and that always gains my respect. I want to begin with Salman Rushdie and the Satanic Verses. There's so much to talk about with fatwas and who gets to issue and what they mean and how we can tie it into this 2021 Boulder shooting. But let's begin. Talk about Rushdie and why you think that fatwa was issued and then why he was so brutally attacked.
Well, you know, if you read the fatwa text, Ayatollah Khomeini is very clear about why he's issuing the fatwa. He says that he wants to put the West on notice, that they can't talk about Islam in a way that offends Islamic sensibilities. It's all about extending Sharia blasphemy restrictions on insulting Allah, Muhammad, and the Quran to the West. And so Rushdie is just the pretext for him to do that. And actually, it's worked great because so many people, Jimmy Carter, and so many people at the time denounced Rushdie and said it's terrible how he's insulting Islam and going on about the insult rather than dealing with the implications for the freedom of speech. And it's the same thing nowadays. As a matter of fact, people have internalized to a tremendous degree the idea that you must not speak about Islam in any critical manner. And that's exactly why the Ayatollah issued this fatwa to start with, to bring this situation about.
You know, what's interesting, we talked about the Charlie Hebdo attacks and on a magazine in France. We've watched this happen again and again and again. You and I have talked about the 2021 Boulder shooting, and now that murderer simply is being held, I guess you say, in captivity. I don't see a trial date pending. I don't think it's like you and I have talked about, gee, why didn't they bring Saddam Hussein home and put him on trial for what George Bush said he did in New York, or why after capturing, why they had to murder Osama, that they could not bring him back and put him on trial. Do you see a connection through all of this?
Oh, absolutely. In the first place, as far as the media goes, there is a conscious decision that they've made to downplay, ignore, and deny Islamic Jihad activity. Now, when it comes to the stabbing attack on Rushdie, they're really in kind of a corner because there's no other way to explain it. They can't say, oh, this guy was mentally ill or something that they usually say, because it's quite obvious that he was carrying out the fatwa. But even then, the New York State Police and the New York Times initially said, well, we don't know his motive.
Yeah.
Which is just the most ridiculous thing out there. But it's all of a piece with the government activity as well. They're all in bed with Islamic Jihad groups. The Obama administration funded Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, and they were involved in all kinds of things that they don't want to come to light, which is why Saddam and Osama couldn't be put on trial.
No, they could not be. I brought that up and asked it. Yeah. Here's this chance to have their own Nuremberg trials, yeah. or what they did to Yoshida. You know, the Japanese, they put these people on trial. And here's this chance. You have the guy that George Bush told me was behind 9/11. And you couldn't bring him back to the city he attempted to ruin, killed so many people. put him on trial for what he did. Why, Mr. Spencer, again, it's self-answering, but why didn't the Bush administration want him back standing trial?
Well, by the same token, why did the Bush administration deny and cover up the Saudi role in the 9/11 attacks, the full extent of which is still not known, but steadily, drip, 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 it's been coming out. Yeah. We know that there were high-level members of the Saudi government who were involved in operations activity with the people who were in contact with the hijackers themselves. And then we have George W. Bush walking hand in hand with the King of Saudi Arabia, as if they're all pals, and having Prince Bandar Bush, as you call him, over to the White House, and they're talking like they're old friends, which of course they were. And so how are you going to get the truth from somebody who doesn't want his friends to be named is involved in this attack?
And everything's okay with the Saudis again, as if it never happened.
Well, Biden had to go hand in hand to them because he gutted the American oil industry. And with the skyrocketing gas prices, the Democrats were looking at a mauling in November. So he had to go and plead to the same crown prince that he said was a pariah a few months ago. I mean, and now he painted himself into a corner as well.
And not for the first time or the last. Indeed. But the Saudis always, it's like understanding the Cold War. It always runs somehow through Cuba. Understanding Middle East intrigue, it somehow always seems to run through Riyadh. And now they're frightened because of the rise of what's taking place in Iran. So the only people that are happy are the arms dealers.
Yes. Well, Iran is rising because of Biden and the Democrats as well, which is not to exonerate the Republicans from this, but Trump did get us out of the disastrous Iran deal, and now they're so intent on putting it back and repudiating Trump's legacy that they're appeasing the Iranians to such a degree that the Iranians now feel as if they can act with impunity on American soil. And so we have this guy who was in touch with the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, and he stabs Rushdie. And that just comes a week or two after a guy had an AK-47, an Azeri, and remember, the Azeris are a very large minority within Iran. An Azeri is outside Masih Alinejad's house in Brooklyn. Masih Alinejad is the most visible and effective Iranian dissident and critic of the regime. And he's got an AK-47 and $1 million in cash. He camps out outside her house for 2 days. And you're telling me the Iranian regime doesn't have anything to do with that? They just were, last year they tried to kidnap her, and it's clear they're operating with impunity on American soil.
What I thought was interesting was how quickly the Iranian government said, we have nothing to do with this attack on Rushdie, and the American press accepts it. And my parents raised all these ugly kids, but all right, let's go to the beginning. Why and what was it that Rushdie did? And I read the verses. What was it that Rushdie did that was so abhorrent that he had to be issued a death sentence? We'll talk about fatwas, but begin with Rushdie and his work, please.
A lot of people don't know, but the novel, The Satanic Verses, that Rushdie wrote that caused all this is actually based on an actual incident in Islamic tradition. And it is called the Satanic Verses incident, where Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, got a revelation that he later wanted to cancel. And so this is all in Islamic sources. It's not made up by enemies of Islam. He decided to tell people that Satan had inspired these verses. So Salman Rushdie, 1400 years later, takes that episode and makes it the basis for this novel that is actually about a Muslim trying to get along in the West and dealing with these strange things out of his own religion and all these things in his head and so on. And the novel makes fun of that incident in Islamic tradition, and you can read it as making fun of Muhammad himself. That's how the Ayatollah Khomeini read it. So he issued a fatwa. Fatwa is not always a death sentence. It's just a religious ruling on a disputed question. But in this case, the disputed question had to do with whether Rushdie's novel was blasphemous, The Ayatollah issued his ruling on Valentine's Day, February 14th,
Yeah.
1989. It's blasphemous, yes, and so Rushdie must be killed. And ever since then, he had this hanging over his head.
But as an amateur reader, the idea that he doesn't say Muhammad, he calls him Mahmoud or somebody in the novel.
Mahmoud.
Yeah.
Mahmoud, but that's
Yeah.
a very insulting name.
Is it really?
It's kind of an insulting corruption of Muhammad, yeah.
Oh, is it? I never knew that.
Yeah.
So that's his. They have a narrator. It's like Moby Dick. There's a narrator, and who's a person in the act, and it's Gabriel who is. They believe it's Gabriel, but it's not. It's Satan. Correct? Is that how that went?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
See, Satan inspires the verses, and this is blasphemous to the Ayatollah Khomeini, even though the story is based on an Islamic tradition that says exactly that.
No. And then in reality or in historical perspective, then they have to reverse the verses, right?
Yes, that's right. And that's what happened. In Islamic tradition, he got this idea, see, because Muhammad was a member of the Quraysh tribe in Mecca.
Right.
And they worshipped these three goddesses.
The
So
women.
he really wanted them to, three
Yeah.
female gods.
Right.
And he wanted them to accept him as a prophet, but they wouldn't.
Right.
So he got this revelation that the three goddesses were the daughters of Allah. Everybody was happy. The Quraysh worshipped with the Muslims, and he thought he'd solved the problem. But then he realized that he had been preaching this very strict monotheism all this time, and now he was saying they're these goddesses. It contradicted himself. So he had contradicted himself. So he said, okay, Satan inspired that. I'm canceling it. And that is the Satanic Verses incident. Now in the Quran, the three goddesses are mentioned, but only in the context of saying, how could you think Allah has daughters and you have sons, since they assume sons are better than daughters?
Right. No, exactly. And this is what makes you so great to be with. So Rushdie writes this, and the attack is immediate. As a matter of fact, from my reading, there are countries that actually ban the book, from my understanding. You can't get a copy of it. And
that's right.
Wow. And that's powerful.
And some of the translators have been killed. The Japanese translator was killed, and I don't remember the other place, but there were others that were attacked. And so this is not the first act of violence that's come from this fatwa. It was the first act on Rushdie himself, but there are other people who've been injured or killed because of this book. And I'm not saying because of this book, like the book is bad, but because of this irrational and hateful fatwa against the book.
I actually read it because it was condemned.
Sure.
I would have bypassed this. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you had that experience or not. Even, when I was a young kid, I said, the church condemns this book. I got to read it. And I would have never read that book if it hadn't been condemned.
Yeah, Salman Rushdie became an international star,
Yeah.
a celebrity worldwide because of the fatwa.
Yeah.
And so, in a certain sense, I mean, it's not to say that means it's okay that he was stabbed, but most people who've read his book would never have heard of him if it hadn't been for this.
Yeah, and I was just like you. I shouldn't say it like you, but I was sort of meandering through it, and you have to go to history texts and read, well, why are they mad? Like you had to have an apex with it. And so that was as far as I got. And then comes the fatwa, but it comes out of Iran. Now, Rushdie was born in Britain, or excuse me, in India, and becomes, I believe, a British citizen.
Yeah, that's right. That's it.
And he was, so why did the Iranians, the Shia, choose to do it as opposed to Sunnis, or did Sunnis go along with it?
Well, Sunnis haven't gone along with it. On the other hand, there are some who have vocally endorsed the fatwa. They certainly haven't condemned it. I think it's just a matter of the Ayatollah Khomeini deciding that he was going to pick this to pick a fight with the West over the freedom of speech. The Sunnis, meanwhile, did it over the Muhammad cartoons.
Right.
And the whole Muhammad cartoon controversy comes from Sunni organizations, particularly Saudis and the Muslim Brotherhood linked organizations in the West. Also, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is both Sunni and Shiite, but largely Sunni driven, took up the Muhammad cartoons. So it's really, in both cases, it's just the pretext that they found to attack the freedom of speech.
Yeah. So when Ayatollah does it, it's in the aftermath of all the upheaval in Iran, and then he fires it off at Rushdie.
But Cat Stevens is a Sunni. He got in hot water. He was on the BBC after he converted to Islam, and they asked him, if you were in a restaurant sitting next to Rushdie, at the next table, and you saw somebody come in with a knife, would you alert Rushdie and protect him? And he said, no, I'd hold him down.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
So a lot of Sunnis have no trouble with that.
He's tried to bring himself back out of that now. But I'm not a great believer that Cat's leveling with us. I watch this stuff. So the history of the fatwa itself and how one becomes, how is one given the ability to do so? How does one become a mufti or have the position to be able to issue a fatwa?
Well, of course, Khomeini was an Ayatollah.
Right.
An Ayatollah is a very serious thing to be. Right. Ayat means word. And so Ayatollah is word of Allah. And that's his title, which obviously you can see that his words must have immense weight because his very title is word of Allah. Also, ayat is the name that is the term rather that Muslims used for verses of the Quran. Each verse is an ayat, a word. And so it's the Ayatollah is like a verse of the Quran living and walking and talking among us. And so that's why they're considered to be infallible, and they're accorded tremendous respect. This is all in Shiite Islam. And so when you have a disputed question, of course, in Sunni Islam, all kinds of people issue fatwas. But for an Ayatollah in Shiite Islam to issue a fatwa, that has tremendous power. It's a very weighty authority.
During medieval Europe, there was something called papal infallibility.
There's papal infallibility, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was
very restricted. It's only when he defines a doctrine and says this is a doctrine of the faith, like the Nicene Creed or something. Right, but the Ayatollahs have a broader infallibility than that.
Muftis, how does one become a mufti? And are there, I think I know the answer, are there women as muftis? No.
There are no women in any of this. A mufti is an Islamic scholar. And there are all kinds of Islamic scholars. There are more muftis out there than ayatollahs. And
but Sunnis don't produce ayatollahs, do they?
No, Sunnis don't have ayatollahs, but they do have muftis. You have probably one of the most famous is the Mufti of Jerusalem.
Absolutely.
Haj Amin al-Husseini during World War II.
Adolf Hitler's mufti.
He was right, exactly. Oh, yeah. He was a friend of Hitler and Himmler and Eichmann, lived in Berlin during World War II and so on. Made broadcasts in Arabic for the Nazis. But another one would be the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar, who is a foremost authority in Sunni Islam. He's Ahmad al-Tayyib. Right now, he's a very smooth deceiver. He's the one who pals around with Pope Francis, signed the Declaration of Human Fraternity with Pope Francis, decrying violence committed in the name of religion and so on. This is all very deceptive because he doesn't really reject jihad violence. He just doesn't even consider it violence because it's simply fidelity to the word of Allah.
When Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Soviet Union, there was a division of the SS that was made up by Muslims, and
the Mufti raised them in the
that's right, and they went along, and that repercussion goes back to when this is all over, and there are Serbs that remember, and that was the part I thought once again that the lack of reading history, that there were people that these people had killed their great uncles and grandfathers, and they remembered it. And so when the time came after Tito's death, they cut loose on each other. that was about a lot of that stuff that had happened in the 30s and 40s and even before that. Is that fair enough?
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. Absolutely. Memories are very long in the Islamic world. They have a
man.
respect for history.
Yeah.
And Osama bin Laden is thought widely to have chosen September 11th for the attack in 2001 because of the siege of Vienna.
Yeah.
And on September 11th, 1683, the Muslims reached their highest point in occupying Eastern Europe. And then the siege was broken in the early hours of September 12th.
Right.
And so a lot of people think that he was signaling to the West by choosing September 11th that the Islamic jihadis were back and advancing in the West once again.
I mean, and as you have pointed out and others have pointed out, why a crescent roll is a crescent roll. It's to do that. Yeah, do that.
They defeated the forces of the crescent, the jihadis. That was
the
to
flag.
Celebrate that.
Yeah. Anytime you see the flag and Venus, it's the mark of the beginning of Ramadan, correct?
Well, the crescent, you see, is for growth because, after all, the word itself is that the moon is growing when it's a crescent moon. It's reaching a crescendo. It's on its way up. And Islam is always growing. That's why its color is green, because it's in a perpetual springtime. And the symbol is the crescent because it's waxing, it's growing larger.
But isn't that the call to Ramadan when the lineup is there, the crescent is there, the Venus is here, and it marks this is the beginning.
You got me on that. Ramadan is the month of the Islamic calendar.
Right.
And of course, every year when Ramadan comes around, that's the time of the fast, when you don't eat or drink all day and then you feast and gorge all night.
But doesn't it take one person to call it, like it lines up? Boom.
Oh, probably, yeah. It's a very precise thing. As a matter of fact, it's very precise even for the daily prayers. They have to come at very specific, particular times, and it's not just the same time every day. If you go to any average mosque website, it will have the very particular times for the different prayers during the day that are all calculated astronomically in the same way. And so, yeah, I'm sure that Ramadan begins in exactly the kind of way you're describing, with very particular calculations.
This man who stabbed Rushdie and the 2021 Boulder shooter, the Boulder shooter born in Syria but comes here as a boy. The mother of the guy who stabbed Rushdie, I read this interview, claimed that he goes to Lebanon, changes in Lebanon, and comes back. There's a term, homegrown. You hear that all the time. Speak to that. Speak to these two in particular.
Well, the thing about Hadi Matar, the guy who stabbed Rushdie, is that he was not raised religious at all. And so he grows up with Muslim parents, identifying as a Muslim, but he apparently had little or no training in what it meant to be a Muslim. When he went to Lebanon, he encountered serious Muslims and was, for the first time, exposed to what it would mean to be a very strict adherent of the Islamic religion. So he comes back home and he scolds his mother and rebukes her, saying, "You didn't give me a strict Islamic upbringing." And clearly she failed in this, and he's angry with her about this. And she says he would have very little to do with her after that, and he stays in his room all the time.
Down to stays in the basement, locks himself. Yeah.
Yep. And he's devout in his observance of Islam. This is something that we see over and over and over. I can't tell you how many people I have seen this with in tracking jihad activity at Jihad Watch over the years, that you see somebody who's not religious, who is doing things that are un-Islamic, like getting drunk, whatever, sleeping around, and he suddenly, for whatever reason, decides to return to his religion and then goes jihad. And people often say, see, he's not a really serious Muslim because look at how he was living before. But they're ignoring or ignorant of the change, that this is somebody who thinks that he has been acting in a sinful manner, and he's got to outweigh the weight of his sins. He needs to go jihad and do some great thing for Allah in order to get into paradise after he's been living in this unreligious way all these years.
The people that get radicalized on the internet. We've talked about that many times. People that just hit this wall, and it happens in political life, it happens in religious life, but it is when people do things in the name of God, they always seem to carry with themselves this self-inflated sense of I'm doing the right thing. That's very, very spooky. And as we said, on that terrible day of 9/11, probably the most religious people of the day, or devout people, were the murderers.
Sure. I mean, look, Muhammad Atta, remember, his luggage got flagged. He didn't. So he's on the plane without his luggage.
Yeah.
And his luggage survives the crash into the building. And in his luggage, they find this tuxedo that he was going to change into. And why? So he could greet the virgins of paradise and be all decked out. And he's got a letter written to himself that was also found after the attacks. And he's saying, always remember to pray, to read the Quran, to remind yourself of why you're doing this. Remember to shout Allahu Akbar as you're starting the hijacking operation, because it strikes terror in the hearts of the unbelievers, which is also a quote from the Quran in chapter 8, verse 60. And so everything that he's doing, he's situating in the context of Islamic belief. And of course, that is something that has been covered up, ignored, elided, denied for 20 some years now.
Leave us with something. There'll be more to come. What I'm most fascinated with in this very negative way is the inability. I mean, a guy like you, and there's a handful of men and women like yourself that say, see, I told you. And then you get on the crap list of Southern Poverty Law Center for simply telling the truth. It's an interesting moment. What do we do with all this?
You know, I wrote a thing yesterday about this, that it's funny to see right now the New York Times and the Washington Post and all these people coming out and saying, why we have to have the freedom to criticize anything, even Islam. And I think you've been excoriating me and other people like me all these years for doing exactly that. Yeah. And now suddenly it's okay. But of course, Rushdie is a reliable leftist. And so they feel like they can get behind him and support him in a way they never would when we were targeted by ISIS in 2015. In the first ISIS attack on American soil, and they tried to kill us all for doing exactly the same thing that Rushdie is on got the Fatwa for.
Yeah. Rushdie was a Bernie bro. He hung out with Bernie. Sure. I mean, he's very left of center, sort of British Labour. He was a Jack Straw supporter, and it's the old traditional British Labour Party, a Bernie bro. And I'm taking doesn't make anything right, but
well, it makes it okay for the New York Times to say we have to support this guy. If it had been me, they would say, well, he had it coming. He's
had it coming.
Right.
I mean, that's so true. I've seen it again and again and again and again and again. I hope you're well, sir. You look great.
You too. Likewise.
We'll be back together on the AM side here pretty soon. You're one of those voices that, again, I was talking to Crowley about gearing up for the show, and I said, we got to do Salman Rushdie, and then I said, and we got to do Robert Spencer, because nobody else is going to go near this. And they run from you, and it's always that sort of that truth teller, the truth shouter. And everybody empties the town square when you show up.
That's the truth.
You're a gift. Mr. Spencer, take care of yourself. See you the next time.
You too.
All right, everybody. The shoot continues. Thanks to Mark Crowley, Brian Taylor. Thanks to Kelly Michaels. I'll see you the next time. Tell a friend about the shoot. Thank you.